Thank you very much for having me here, Emerging Media Program at Boston University, Screen Time BU, and all the graduate students organizing, putting the hard work to organize this conference. Very important spaces for us graduate students to talk about our research. I start this talk by showing you this iconic picture of the 2018 Brazilian presidential elections. This was a wildly circulated fake news item that, together with a comment, stated that the second place candidate, Fernando Haddad, if elected, would make these special baby bottles mandatory in the national primary school system. As funny as this story sounds, for those following Brazilian politics and what happened last week, one of the biggest journalistic leak since Snowden, the Vaza Jato, we know that this is a serious debate, right? Among other factors, how can an image like this represent and do so much harm? I would enjoy actually doing a presentation only on Brazilian fake news aesthetics, very rich topic. But today I hope to take a step back and talk about all the other invisible elements that compose this image that is also present in any news, regardless of being it fake or not. The effort here is not only to try to understand the inner workings of this image and break it open, but also consider all these contextual conditions that are present in the study of the one object that usually mediates any kind of news, the graphical user interface. In our case, many scholars and specialists have dealt with the effects of digital platforms, data collection, algorithm-mediated and non-mediated feeds, and the larger impact of the internet on the consumption of information in general, but I believe that few have understood algorithmically driven news as a form of image, right? Audience have to look to a screen in order to consume it. I hope to argue today that it is precisely these contextual conditions that emerge from the interface and its inner workings that make the problem so complex. And I want to quickly go through two concepts, technical and operational images by Flusser and Farocki, to show that the news items in the screen are in fact a stack image composed of at least 3 layers for the sake of our conversation here today. I got interested in this topic by looking at the shifting character of web journalism and how professional journalism was being challenged by social media. Here, the Hudson story that broke through Twitter in 2009 and made a part of academia create this myth of the empowered user. That no professional journalist, even though with the best infrastructure and funds at their disposal at the time, could be as fast or as omnipresent or ubiquitous as the average citizen with a smartphone and social media. When we think of the economics of platform sovereignty today, you become extremely skeptical about this precisely because of the underlying narrative capacity of the interface that is mostly invisible. And here, not only talking about algorithms, but interactive visual elements as well, such as likes, retweets, etc. And this problem didn't start here, right? It's not a new problem. If we look back in 1965, Ted Nelson, which is the creator of the hyperlink, already presented us with a problem of a semantic thread between files and pages. His system was eventually overtaken by Douglas Engelbart's concept of hierarchy and structure, 1965. And most of the solutions that I've encountered in my research have been related to discussing fake news from the perspective of freedom of speech, new comprehensive state legislation, and professional journalism as potential antidotes for this emergent scenario, when I believe there is a big chunk of the object not being taken into consideration. Here, for instance, another fake news that candidate for President João Moedo would be actually this Mexican telenovela actor. Okay, so I'll try to go quickly through these two concepts and see how they apply in our case, and how we can take a step back from the digital item itself and start moving towards a more infrastructural, interface-based discussion. Vilém Flusser, which is this Czech philosopher who did most of his work in Brazil, tells us in his book Towards the Philosophy of Photography that images are signifying surfaces. They are the product of a machine that compresses 4 dimensions into 2, namely time and depth, and these dimensions are decompressed again in our brain when we look at them. The key thing here is that since the image is being produced by a machine, this image becomes a window to the world. Here's our window. And I quote from Vilém Flusser, "This apparent non-symbolic, objective character of technical images leads whoever looks at them to see them not as images, but as windows. Observers does not believe them as they do their own eyes. Consequently, they do not criticize them as they do their own eyes. Consequently, they do not criticize them as images, but as ways of looking at the world, to the extent that they don't criticize them at all. Their criticism is not an analysis of their production, but an analysis of the world. This lack of criticism of technical images is potentially dangerous at a time when technical images are in the process of displacing texts. Dangerous for the reason that the objectivity of technical images is an illusion." 1985. So it's not about the individual element present in the image itself, but it's about the parameters from which this image renders reality and transforms it into an image. Flusser was writing this about photography, but it's completely expandable to the graphical user interface. So how machines make images, right? So the person activates the machine, can be a smartphone, can be a camera, and then this generates an image which is interpreted by the person again. The apparatus itself then is also a contextual relation, right? Because even though apparently it does not codify reality, this is the task of the human that manipulates the camera, through the choices of its parameters, it does. Choices of the programmer, of the engineer, the factory owner, and there is clearly always more than only one way of doing everything. Therefore, the big step here, and this is the bridge to Farocki, is that the machine is no longer only producing images, but they start to produce reality because of its internal workings and its window quality. Harun Farocki, on the other side, German filmmaker, by studying the images produced in the Gulf War, observed that those images had a special character. They were images being made by machines for machines to read. If I expand this concept, then operational images are images that no longer serve for the purpose of merely representation. They actually do what they represent. If you click them, something happens in the real world. We can look at it as the signal exchange between machines organizing inputs from any source and sensor, no longer only from human user, processing this information, outputting anything from machine gun fire to heart-soothing text messages. The graphical user interface is supposed to make this whole manipulation easier, but also the interface itself is an image. In short, images have become stacks of images with different layers of operation that in our case we can summarize them in 3: information, interface, and code, with their underlying mediums: images, pixels, and machines. This contextual cut that we made here in the slides, namely the bottom 2 layers, are extremely important to the theorization of algorithmically driven news and also fake news. We can zoom out of the visual item itself and understand the discussion surrounding algorithmically driven news as a visual one, focusing on the state of circulation of information instead of only trustworthiness. Only then, I believe, we can start moving towards true media accountability. The problematics of these images that are devoid of social intent as are not really intended for human eyes is that they are essentially invisible, yet they are the groundwork of most of our lives today. Thank you very much.